tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Our guests waiting to be profiled are Joseph Marioni and Kevan Hall. Painter Joseph Marioni was born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. He went to the Art Institute there and then to the San Francisco Art Institute. But he left San Francisco to go and live and paint in New York. Why did you go to New York?
Because everything I was interested in terms of art was being done in New York.
I assume you always wanted to be a painter because right out of high school you were at the Art Institute and at the San Francisco Art Institute.
That's correct. I've always wanted to be an artist, and very early on in my age I fell into painting as my particular practice, and so it was a natural, logical progression.
In the beginning, what were you painting?
Well, there was all my student work. You know, when you're a student, you study all kinds of different styles and movements. But at the point at which I graduated from the Art Institute, I found my identity as a painter, which was primarily a single color presentation.
Oh, it was already?
At the very beginning. So in 1970, when I left the Art Institute, my work has been an evolutionary progression forward from that.
Is that right? So yeah. Were you ahead of the say the swing?
Well, I certainly was different than the San Francisco Art Institute, which in the 60s and going into the 70s was interested in San Francisco funk.
Who was there, or who was teaching?
Well,
at that
I
time?
got there, I was there from 66 to 70. It was right after Diebenkorn had left the Institute and Bischoff and Lobdell had all left the Institute, and Fred Martin had taken it over and was trying to establish what he called San Francisco Art Institute Surreal.
But they were doing figurative, those people, right?
William T. Wiley came in, and then they all started this whole sort of narrative, local storytelling.
Oh, I see.
Right. So I was still painting what you would consider New York school painting while I was there.
But were they influenced? Did they influence you?
No.
No, so what were you doing? Just finishing up your painting? Because
well, I had a lot of undergraduate work. So I had studied music and architecture and art conservation and art history and had a lot of undergraduate work. So when I got there, I was completely schooled academically. And so while I was there was during the hippie movement. So I actually was a hippie despite my current haircut.
You had long hair? Yes. You had hair?
I had hair, yes. Yes, I've outgrown my hair.
But then, were you painting one-color paintings while you were there?
They were pretty much, at that point, when I found this kind of one-color presentation, I recognized somehow intuitively that this was me, this was my identity.
Tell us what that really is, because for someone, we have a painting of yours on the set. For someone to look at a painting that's one color, this ahead of any other kind of painting, if you see something abstract, you always hear people say, I could do that.
Right.
My kid could do that.
Right.
But when you see a one-color painting, that's even beyond. They really think they can do that.
They think they can do that, and the common statement is, oh, hasn't this been done before?
Exactly.
Klein did it, Rodchenko did it, you know. And basically, what you have to understand is that there is a tradition of this, which is rooted all the way back into the Renaissance. And there's three basic structures in painting: still lifes, portraits, and landscapes. And I'm rooted in the portrait structure.
We talked about portraiture. Could you paint a portrait?
In what you mean is the academic sense.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, generally a portrait is thought of is that you do a picture of somebody and you try to capture their personality.
Yes.
And it is a single person, and so it is just me and you, one-on-one.
Right.
The tradition, I come out of that tradition in which it is just the viewer and the painting, one-on-one, in which I'm trying to capture the personality of the color.
So this is a portrait of blue.
In a sense, it's a portrait of blue. Not that it represents blue in the traditional portraiture, but it is a portrait of blue in which I am trying to capture the full breadth of the experience of blue. And what doesn't translate into the camera is that inside this blue there is a very bright pink.
So just take me through this process. The interesting thing is, most of these one-color paintings I've seen are on different kinds of surfaces, hard surfaces. And when we were installing this today on the set, it was soft. I could see a finger go through it.
Right. It's I paint on canvas. I paint acrylic on Belgian linen stretched over a wooden support. Some of my colleagues paint on aluminum sheets. Some paint on hardwood surfaces, plywood surfaces. So it's a variety of different things, and the particulars of each painting are directly related to the material.
Oh, that's interesting too.
Yeah.
So acrylic, you get this shine from acrylic?
I have the acrylic made for me. It's a pure acrylic with no additives or fillers, and I do that in order to get the transparent layer. What doesn't translate is that this is made of transparent layers of paint.
It just looks like a hard, shiny surface.
Yes, it's because of the lighting and the circumstance. You get it into the gallery or into your home, and you spend time with it, you begin to see, oh, you're looking through transparent layers of blue back into greens and reds.
I see. One thing that you also told me, one of the reasons you didn't want to bring a painting is because we didn't have a wall, and you talked about your painting as an object.
Yes.
Like, would it be, besides being a portrait, would it be a sculpture?
No, it's not a sculpture, but it is in a tradition of the developing idea of modernism, of the independence of the art object itself. So early in the century, there was this art form called found objects, which comes out of Duchamp and the ready-made. And then the mid-century specific objects, in which an object was made that had no other purpose than its aesthetic experience. And most of the thinking early on in the 20th century modernism was three-dimensional. And then finally we got to be thinking in two-dimensional terms. So yes, it is an object, but the object is determined by the fact that it receives paint.
What color, I'm going to just show this while you're talking, because it's yellow, right? Mm-hmm. And there. And then I'm going to show, as he gets closer, you can't see very much from this photograph until you get all the way into the edges. And I'm going to show the edges, which are down on the bottom there.
That's the detail of the lower edge of the painting. And as you begin to go to the edges, I leave the layers visible, so you can clearly see. Like
on this corner,
right.
You can see the layers.
You can see the layers. The paintings are usually made anywhere from 3 to 7 layers of paint, depending on the size of the painting.
Do you choose certain colors? I mean, you talk about this, say this yellow painting. And you're trying to bring out the personality of this yellow color. Are there certain colors that make you think yellow is, right here on the corner we can see how it works. Are there certain colors that tell you about yellow?
Most people don't know that there are no primary colors. You know, we're taught in school red, yellow, and blue are the primaries. Well, this is a general frame of reference, but there is no yellow that is absolutely yellow. There is no one yellow that is yellow and nothing else but yellow. All yellows are either greenish or reddish, because they function within the light spectrum, the wave spectrum. So what I'm doing is I'm working with transparent layers of yellow that are different yellows. So I put one yellow over top another, but one layer will be a very reddish going towards orange, one will be very greenish, and I keep layering them one on top of the other until I build this volume of color that has a range. So you look at the yellow color, the longer you stay with it, you begin to see red and green in the yellow.
Would you use those same backgrounds for a blue painting? Does it talk about blue personality, those colors?
Well, blue, there's no pure blue. I mean, it goes between reddish and greenish blues.
So you just use those, those speak to the personality.
Right.
When I was reading some of the reviews, the critics say there's a great tension in your work. What is tension?
Well, the tension is the color. The tension is the color. If you make a yellow painting and it's pushing that range, it's expanding to red and green. There's a tension between red and green. The yellow itself is not in tension, but the red and green are, because the wavelengths are pulling against each other.
I see. So that's the tension. So then that interacts with the person who's looking at it as well.
Right. Sure. If you hate yellow, you're going to hate my yellow paintings. But if you love yellow, then you're going to find them extremely attractive.
But it'll keep looking different as you interact with it, right?
Absolutely. It looks different in the morning than it does at night.
I see. Well, the other thing, you've explained all of this. Is there a language? Do you write about what this blue painting is about? I mean, is there some kind of language arts that have to relate to it, or can the people just feel these things?
They should be able to just feel it if they're willing to just look at it and participate in the experience of it. Like, do you have to know and study food in order to taste food?
No, but you like to know what goes into it.
Okay, the dialectic of it, the history of it is modernism. This is a development of high modernism. These are not postmodern paintings. These
so
are
what are the
modernist
difference?
paintings.
What's the difference, excuse me? Not what
Modernism is founded on the recognition of the individual. Right? Our democracy is the perfect modern document because it guarantees the unalienable rights of the individual. And this goes all the way back to the Renaissance. If I ask you to name a Renaissance artist, you can mention Michelangelo. Right? You can mention a dozen Renaissance artists. But name me a medieval artist.
I don't know the name.
Yeah, precisely.
Why?
Does Tillman Riemenschneider come to mind? He's a great German, because the idea of the individual comes in with the Renaissance.
You know, that's the other thing I noticed in your resume. You show all over Europe. It seems like the Germans, because you brought that name up, the Germans seem to appreciate this kind of work more than the Americans.
They have a longer history than we do.
Is that why?
Sure. I mean, if you think of the Russian avant-garde in the 1918, Malevich making a white square on a white ground, this doesn't come to America as an expression or an art idea until around the late 50s. Frank Stella's black paintings come out of this, what I call the European concrete. So they've got 40-year history prior to us, plus all early modernist painting was done in Europe.
So there's another one-color painter, Frank Stella, but he got away from it. He used it at one part of the time.
Right. And he was never accused of being a monochrome painter.
Right?
The black paintings are only black. No one ever says they're monochrome paintings, but my paintings have 3 to 7 different colors in them, and I am always labeled a monochrome painter.
Well, what about Richard Serra? He was painting black paintings too for a while.
They're black ink stick on wall,
but not
these are
solid
sculptures drawings. Yeah,
not solid colors.
Yeah.
So that was one of the things I was thinking about, was how you're in so many collections in Europe. In many public collections, public collections in America, and you show in museums across. In museums across America, single shows or with group.
Both. I do one-man shows in museums here and in Europe.
And how do we know what other artists actually like fit in with your work, with your thinking?
I have a very large company. The best way to understand it is that if you drop back 100 years and you think of Impressionism 100 years ago, Impressionism was relatively unknown in terms of the general art market. Who was the most famous artist 100 years ago? Highest price paid artist. He was the darling of society. He ruled the salons. Adolphe Bouguereau.
Bouguereau. Oh.
Yeah. He was the darling of society. Monet was out working in the country. He was only known by a very small elite group of people because he was the fashionable artist, Bouguereau, and Monet was not fashionable. So I and my colleagues are like the Impressionists.
But you're a group, right?
We're a group, and it's not located anywhere. It's international. The show that is currently up at the Chalk Mall Gallery contains California artists, East Coast artists, and European artists in it. So it's an international representation of it.
And is there any kind of like pullback about showing with anyone monochromatic painters?
What do you mean by pullback?
I mean, like you wouldn't want to show with one or the other?
Well, generally the problem with monochrome and why people criticize it is, unfortunately, and I have to agree with this, as a practice of painting, most of the practitioners of it make rather boring work. You know, and I'm not going to mention any names in terms of that, but if you've ever been to Italy and seen Italian Impressionism, there was actually a form of Impressionism going on in Australia at one point. And it's you know, I don't want to say it's terrible work publicly, but it's terrible work. And so you look at Impressionist painting, and it's similar. This kind of work that's going on at the present time has a history. It's 100 years old. And there are practitioners of it that are really good and exciting, and there are people that are not. That
So
are boring.
it's up to the viewer to come and have this interaction, if it's a group show, or to also have the interaction with you. Well, we had a great interaction with you.
Okay, good.
Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. I'm glad you were here. Go back to New York. It's beautiful. Thanks for watching Joseph Marioni. And don't go away, because we'll be right back with Kevan Hall. Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and we're back with designer Kevan Hall. Kevan was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. He studied fashion at Cass Technical High School, and at that time won a scholarship to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in Los Angeles. While he was there, he traveled to Europe, where he learned about French fashion in particular, and when he graduated, he was awarded the Outstanding Fashion Designer and immediately got a job as an assistant to Harriet Selwyn, who was a great friend of mine.
Right.
And what were you doing with her? Or what was she doing? She was doing sportswear?
At the time, Harriet was doing the collection called Fragments, which was really just the toast of the town, actually, of America. I mean, she'd come up with this wonderful kind of layering concept of the Kiana, the jerseys, and the silks, all these multiple layers, and the collection was just on fire. And she had interviewed probably maybe 300 people or so, and she selected me to be her assistant.
Her thing was all about fabric, simplicity,
Right.
mix and match.
Mix and
I don't know, were
match.
they mix and matching?
They were
Was it a
mix-
new
oh, yeah.
thing then for
Yeah.
her to do?
It was. Yeah, it was really great.
And how was your mentality as far as fitting into her forward thinking?
Well, for me, it was great because it was, like I said, the collection was really very, very hot, and it just gave me an opportunity to get in there and see how someone with, you know, a lot of experience, a seasoned professional, how they approached putting a collection together, how they approached, you know, doing color stories, how they approached selecting their fabrications and that kind of thing. So it was fascinating and wonderful.
Did your European travels at that time help with Harriet's line?
It did, because you know, I have a love for, you know, luxe and a love for couture and that kind of thing.
You do.
And that's what Harriet was also doing. You know, she was using some of the most beautiful fabrics from around the world.
And then from Harriet, where did you go?
From Harriet, I did a lot of, you know, freelancing for a lot of different companies and some consulting for, you know, dressy companies, evening companies. I went from doing budget collections all the way up to swimwear and couture.
So you were back in school again, learning everything with each thing.
Right.
Then Kevan Hall Couture came.
Correct. Yeah.
And that was in the 80s, right?
That was in the early 80s.
And and you used fabulous fabrics, great cuts. I think you brought some fabrics. Just tell us a little bit about Kevan Hall Couture.
Well, Kevan Hall Couture, we called it modern couture because at the time there really was no one in the country that I knew of that was doing things that were of a couture level, but that were kind of young and spirited. Everything was matronly, had like an older hand, and really over-constructed. So what we did was we took out a lot of that construction and really lightened things up and just made them more sensuous and a little sexier.
And what do we call couture? Those are
clothes that are, you know, made one at a time, made by hand. There's lots of hand work and lots of stitching.
Will you take orders on those as well?
We did. We took, you know, special orders for specific clients, and then in addition to that, we sold the department stores and we sold, you know, great specialty shops around the country. So it wasn't couture in the old French sense. It was more like really luxury, ready to wear.
So you had, say, 2 or 3 dresses that you could take to Texas with you,
right?
Or ship to Texas to a specialty shop.
Right, right.
I see.
And then they could also order from those dresses, you know, additional pieces for the shop or for their customers.
Then you went into sportswear, Kevan Hall Sportswear?
Sportswear. It was
Is
called,
that the name?
It was called Studio at the time, Kevan Hall Studio.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
It was Studio.
Right.
I remember that.
Yeah, yeah. That collection was one in which we used a little bit less expensive fabrics, and it was more of a mass marketed collection. Just, we really fine-tuned the price point to make it more accessible to more people.
Was it more sportswear? Totally
More
sportswear?
Yeah, more sportswear jackets and, great trousers, a wonderful blouse and sweaters, just a whole wonderful mix of
You were
good
named young talent, the young talent of the time by
Right.
Women's Wear Daily, and Vanity Fair wanted your
Right.
clothes photographs. You were on 7th Avenue, I
Right.
think, mixing with all the people.
Right.
And you even did some advertising. Was it Absolute Kevan Hall?
It was Absolute Kevan Hall.
Was it?
Yeah, it was. They asked me to design a gown for their ad campaign, so we did that, and it ran in Vanity Fair.
Oh,
yeah,
I
it was
see.
great.
But then you were also dressing young actresses.
Right. That's one of the things that, it's always a pleasure to do that. I mean, we have had the opportunity to dress, people like Charlize Theron, Minnie Driver, Jessica Parker. I mean, the list goes on and on. Singers and
Now.
actresses and...
Now, those
Yes.
are people who are...
Those are people that are famous now.
But when you first started, you were dressing those young...
Yes, this is true, yeah. I mean, we dressed Natalie Cole in those days.
Right.
Patti LaBelle in those days. Valerie Harper. I mean, just those who was important at that time, that were really visible.
Were you making dresses for them to wear to premieres and to special parties?
Right,
so
premieres, special parties, and very often, just for their own personal wardrobe.
Well, you're here in California now. Did you do any TV designing for like TV
We did, yeah, we did a little
shows?
bit for stylists or whatever would come and pull clothes for various television shows and that kind of thing. So
Then, after we spent this time being such a famous young designer, you got a fabulous opportunity to go with Halston in New York.
right, that was a phenomenal
How old were you?
I was a seasoned designer by that time.
You were still young.
Yeah, but that was
Because
a great.
it was like startling to people that
Right.
you went into that collection or to design for that designer who had a name that was top name.
Yeah, it was very. It was controversial. Hadn't heard of me, although my own collection had been established for many years. We were selling by this time, the best specialty stores and the best, shops in the country. I Magnons, Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus. We were everywhere. Because I wasn't a 7th Avenue designer at the time, it was, where's this guy coming from? Coming from California.
You stayed in California and made your name there, which is so great
Right,
because we have some great designers here
Yeah.
who love to live here because it's so wonderful.
Civilized.
But did you have to go back to New York
Yes,
and live?
actually, I commuted for. I was there for 3 years. Every other weekend, I was on an airplane, back and forth. My children are here, and I didn't want to uproot my
Oh,
family,
you didn't
my wife
move
and
them
kids.
there?
I never moved them.
Well, one thing that I always wondered, here's Kevan Hall, who had his own name, his couture, his sportswear, well known in California. You go back to design for Halston, a name, and it didn't say Kevan Hall.
Right.
It said Halston. Was
Halston.
that hard on you?
It wasn't hard because everyone knew at that time. When I accepted that post, they knew that it was.
Along with it. But because he was so well known, you hit a different level of celebrities and society you were dressing.
Right. And that was phenomenal.
Was
Because
it
again,
fun?
It was great because it was all of the the Upper East Side girls, all the young pretty socialites, and then all of the movie stars, and the phones were ringing, and the collection was so well received. With all the skeptics around, when that first collection hit the runway, it was just fantastic.
And then you decided to come back and start your own signature collection again?
Came back to L.A.
Give me these things. Give me these fabrics.
Well, give you some
because-
fabrics to kind of
Give
show
me some
you.
fabrics because you have a signature collection right now
Right.
at Melrose Alley.
Yes, that's what we're showing
And
today.
and where else do you show your?
The collection is also, as I mentioned, we are in Neiman Marcus, and we're also in Saks Fifth Avenue.
What kind of fabric is this?
This is a beaded chiffon, and one of the things that we do in many of our collections is we'll develop a theme for the collection, and then based on that theme, we'll develop beading or embroideries and things that kind of,
Let me see. Let me just take these because they're they're great.
They're
this
all
one
yummy.
is so great. Look
Yeah,
at
this is great. That's with all the cutout work and embroidery. That actually might even be a vintage piece, which is something.
Could this be a dress? Would this, you make this into a dress?
Yeah, or a bodice, or it could be, a cuff or whatever.
And then I have kind of these things.
Right.
That are just
pretty imported silk prints, in different colors that, may or may not make it into the collection. But things that I'm kind of considering right now as I'm starting to work on fall 2003.
I see.
Yeah.
More
pretty
fancy fabric. Just wonderful fabrics. Do you drape? Do you do like the old-fashioned way?
Yeah, it gets draped on a mannequin. We put it onto a mannequin, and I work with some phenomenal assistant, designers who are actually drapers. And then we'll look at the drape on the mannequin, and then I'll make the decision whether or not it should be, longer, shorter. I'll change it while while we're working on it, and
Tell us
goes
about
from there.
this too.
This is an example of just some quick sketches that I've done, and basically the theme of this particular grouping is based on triangular shapes. So within that theme, you'll see the seaming and the cuts of the dresses are all architectural, are all triangles.
And could they be made out of any of the fabrics that we just saw?
They could be, some solids and some prints as well.
Here's something else that isn't quite as dressy.
Right, that's more of the sportswear edge.
This is beautiful. And then, but you have the fabrics.
They're attached there, yeah. So that's what I see that particular sketch or designs being made in, which would be double-faced wool, cashmere with cashmere sweaters.
Do you take your art into any other fields? Do you paint? Do you cook?
I'm not a great cook. I mean, when I was in New York, I cooked a little bit because I was there. I didn't have a cook. My family was, and my wife was here, in LA. So I learned, do some pasta dishes and a few other little things. But
and what about painting?
Painting, I enjoy doing. Yeah.
You are. Do you do these drawings?
I do these. Yeah, these are my drawings, and just very quick, quick croquis. I just like to get all the ideas out and onto the paper as quick as possible.
We're going to keep watching for Kevan Hall now that you're back with your own name and you continue to use your name. We're so happy to have had you here today.
Oh, thanks. It's my pleasure. I'm so excited
I'm
to be
really
here.
glad you were here. And we're happy that all of you were watching the show today, too. And keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, 44th floor, 917, Los Angeles. And we'll see you next time on the Joan Quinn Profiles.
Thank you.